All right, Nuggets fans, welcome into Pickaxe and Roll, brought to you by our good friends over at BetOnline. I am your host, Ryan Blackburn at NBA Blackburn on Twitter, part of the Mile High Sports Podcast Network, and I am here. I am ready to discuss an unfortunate losing streak that the Nuggets are on. One that I thought, this could definitely happen if you don't take care of the Chicago game, and lo and behold, they didn't take care of the Chicago game, and they lost the other two. Now they're on a 3-game losing streak after losing to the New York Knicks. Final score of that one, 122 to 112. Unfortunate results for the Nuggets, an unfortunate result for a lot of fans that were getting excited about the momentum that they were generating over the course of these last few weeks. Feels like that has really subsided over the course of these last few games. It's not all doom and gloom, and I know I do a bad job of that in terms of I'm generally pretty reactionary in a lot of these things, though I do think I try to embody the perspective of what somebody would be feeling in this, and I get people being concerned because I'm concerned. The Nuggets are still good. They're still a good team. Good teams go through these struggles. I think the distinction, and I talked about this in my most recent article, there is a distinction between good and great, good and elite. And I'm thinking the Nuggets are kind of riding that line right now, not necessarily on one or the other, but I don't think that they're fully elite. And I don't know how they get there between now and the end of the season with their current roster. We'll get into that. We'll talk about everything. And I dropped a pretty big article over the course of this last hour or so. So if you are interested in some additional thoughts and machinations and discussions on the trade deadline, make sure to go check that out. It has a lot in it. I'll bring up some of it here, but definitely not all of it. But before we get into last night's game, got to pay some bills. This podcast, as you know, it's brought to you by the good folks over at BetOnline. They continue to be the world's most trusted betting platform and your number one source for online betting in 2025. Whether you're a seasoned fan or a first-time bettor, BetOnline is your ultimate game day companion. They'll definitely have odds on the Super Bowl, whole bunch of prop bets. They always have their stuff on the NBA, college basketball, and more. They're your number one sports betting source for the new year. BetOnline, the game starts here. Once again, I'm your host, Ryan Blackburn. Thank you so much for tuning into the show. If you haven't yet before, please hit that like button, hit that subscribe button. That definitely helps the podcast a lot. Here on Mile High Sports, we've got 11.8K subscribers, have been moving in the right direction and progressing and doing a great job. I've been continuing to put out the best content that I possibly can. And we've just got a lot going for Mile High Sports right now. So there's some other things in the pipeline that should be coming out post All-Star break for Nuggets stuff as well. So make sure to stick around and stay tuned. All right, let's get into the flow of this thing. Let's talk about this game last night before we get into any trade stuff. The Knicks win. If you had listened to my shows at any point, I thought the Nuggets were going to lose by 30, by 35 or somewhere close to that based off of the way that they had approached the previous couple of games and the way that the Knicks had played. I thought the Knicks actually played worse than I expected them to. There were some shots that they missed. There were some decisions that they made. There were some outlets that they had on the defensive end that weren't necessarily great. It does prove that the Nuggets are better than the place where I thought that they were, but they still weren't good enough, and they lost by 10, and it probably should have been more, if I'm being honest, even though the Nuggets were up late in this game. They were up for a while, especially in that third quarter. Ultimately let go of the rope, and it's too bad. The Knicks, you look at the box score lines, they won every quarter by 2 to 4 points. Actually, 1 to 4 points. 4 points in the first, 2 points in the second, 1 point in the third, and 3 points in the fourth. But the Nuggets were leading. They had a great run in that third quarter, but then just gave it all back in the late stages of that third quarter. I don't think that Jokic had a great game, obviously. I don't think that there were a lot of guys off the bench other than Christian Braun who had a great game. And there were just a lot of folks that were kind of out of place, including Michael Porter Jr. So lots to get into. We'll talk about all the different layers, but you can't really talk about this game without talking about okay. Fantastic. Lot of layers to this one. Nikola Jokic goes out due to foul trouble with 2 minutes to go in the first quarter. And then the Nuggets are effectively like behind the 8 ball for that entire time. They went down by 12 and it looked like the game was going to spiral out of control even in the first quarter. But credit to the Nuggets and credit to the reserves, mostly like Murray and Westbrook and Aaron Gordon at times, but mostly Christian Braun when he came in. Those guys did a great job of like just stabilizing everything. It was nice to see what they were able to do and nice to see them have some backbone there. I really was interested in how Christian Braun would respond to this game because Aaron Gordon started in place of him. There were debates as to whether Westbrook would come off the bench, whether Braun would come off the bench, whether Denver would do something radical other than that. You kind of had a feeling that it was going to be one of those two because it's really hard to bench Jokic, Murray, Porter, Gordon. But Christian Braun comes off the bench, and I think he responds reasonably well. The plus minus doesn't reflect it, but I thought he had a pretty good game. I don't think it was him who was really struggling here. Murray helped keep them in it in that first quarter and in that first half, had 33 points on the game, but he had 11 points in the first quarter and was relatively efficient. It was good to see from him. Unfortunately, a lot of guys got into foul trouble in this one. Jokic, most notably, he only played 9 minutes in that first half, and yet the Nuggets were only down 6 points at the end of the first half. So you had to feel good about it if you're a Nuggets fan. But then Michael Porter also played a very similar amount of time in that first half, and he was never able to fully recover and get into the flow either. Felt like with Murray, took 25 shots. He effectively had to take over as the lead creator for the offense. And he did a whole bunch of good things, but also just took a lot of shots. And the Nuggets were definitely able to, they were not really able to get into a full rhythm as a team at any point. Most of that was due to the foul trouble initially. Some of it was due to Murray taking as many shots as he did. The Nuggets just don't really know how to operate when Murray's taking the most shots, when he's isolating, when he's running the pick and roll with Joker anymore. It doesn't feel like anybody really knows where to stand. Michael Porter gets uncomfortable and starts to cut despite the fact that he's a 40% three-point shooter and their best spacer. He needs to be staying on the perimeter, but he keeps cutting into space for some reason. Russell Westbrook kind of hangs out wherever. Aaron Gordon is doing what he needs to do on the backside, but sometimes if he's in the short corner while the other two are kind of messing around with their spacing, the floor just gets pretty crowded. And there was one turnover that Murray had where he actually drew a double team because of how well he was playing and threw a bad pass that was picked off by OG Anunoby, but that was because OG could come over. There was no reason to think that he was going to be able to make that pass. Murray decided to make it anyway. It was a bad decision, but OG was able to come over because the Nuggets were cramping the spacing so badly on the weak side. It was really odd. Okay, this guy's getting banned. I'm so tired of him. Yeah, no, it was a frustrating thing. And I think that the Nuggets, they had this game at various moments. They were doing pretty well overall by getting back into the game in the third quarter and really taking the lead. But again, the transition defense and the turnovers and just not really being able to execute on that end really hurt them. It really, really hurt them. 14 turnovers for the Nuggets, just 5 for the New York Knicks. And the number that I'll point out here is just Jalen Brunson's stat line. I was worried about Brunson coming into this game because I don't think the Nuggets have any answer for him. They don't really have any answer for the Brunson Towns pick and roll. I thought Jokic did a decent job on Towns individually. Like, you look at Towns' stat line, obviously he was affected by foul trouble as well. 14 points, 6 of 12 from the field, 0 of 4 from 3. I thought Jokic closed out really well on him on the perimeter, but it left Denver very vulnerable to Brunson, and it left them vulnerable to Towns' drives. And they just had no answer for either of those two things. Brunson had 30 points on 10 of 16 from the field, 3 of 6 from 3, 7 of 7 from the line. Just a great stat line. And then he had 15 assists compared to just 2 turnovers. Dude played 36 minutes, was just dicing. He was dicing Denver up, and they had no answer for him. That's a tough place for the Nuggets to be, because if you're looking for silver linings, it's really tough because a lot of guys like Jalen Brunson are going to be in the playoffs. Anthony Edwards, I think, is a pretty good example of that. He's obviously not the point guard, but in terms of a ball handler that can't be stopped in the pick and roll, Denver's had trouble with those guys this year. They don't really have a great answer. It was initially Westbrook who was on Brunson, I believe. Murray spent some time on him. Aaron Gordon switched on to him. Aaron Gordon, I thought, did a pretty decent job when he was switched out. But in the second half, the most part, Michael Porter Jr. was the guy that the Knicks were hunting. He was like, it was Josh Hart setting a screen, or Mikal Bridges or OG Anunoby, whoever Michael Porter was guarding. They would set a screen for Brunson at the top of the key, and then Brunson would wait for Michael Porter to get onto him, and he would either isolate against Porter and try to create a good shot that way, or he would run pick and roll where he would then involve Porter and Jokic. And we've seen this a lot of times with James Harden. Harden does this a ton, where he hunts what he thinks to be Denver's weakest link or their weakest point for which they can run offense. And Porter just doesn't really do a great job of staying attached and staying close without fouling. And that was a big deal in this particular game. Porter was in a pretty tough place. It's never easy for him as a 6'10", bigger kind of forward to have to chase around some of these smaller guards. It's completely understandable. But then you go back to matchups that he had against the Minnesota Timberwolves, where they couldn't put him on Julius Randle, where, like, what was he going to do in the Chicago Bulls game where they have 4 guards and wings that were just running and spacing? He wasn't really able to guard those guys either, really able to make an impact defensively. It's been a while since Michael Porter's made a defensive impact. And like, you'll look at what's happening in a lot of these games, and he's the one I think that's getting picked apart a lot of the time. Jeff Morton, shout out. We've been talking offline a lot lately. I always appreciate my chats with Jeff. He says, Ryan, my concern about this team is simple. Malone seems to be flailing for the right lineup, and I'm not certain there is a right lineup with this flawed team. I think that's a very salient point. That is a very good point. We're talking about this a little bit with actually, you know what? Let me get back to this on the other side. When we come back, I do want to talk about the starting lineup and why I don't think that there was a good choice. And then we'll get to Jeff's answer on the other side. We'll be right back on Pickaxe and Roll. All right, we are back. Pickaxe and Roll. Ryan Blackburn, thank you so much for tuning into the show. Hit the like button, hit the subscribe button. Would really appreciate it. Let's get back into this. Jeff says again, Ryan, my concern about this team is simple. Malone seems to be flailing for the right lineup, and I'm not certain there is a right lineup with this flawed team. It is a flawed team. This is a team where the Nuggets They're trying to figure out exactly how to handle things. They're trying to figure out exactly what the right combinations are. And there are good combinations. Westbrook and Jokic make sense. Murray and Jokic make sense. Christian Braun and Jamal Murray makes sense for like a variety of reasons. Michael Porter and Jokic makes sense, or it has been so good for much of this time. And I think that at this point, the Nuggets they have 6 starters for 5 spots right now. But the problem is that every time you put in one of those starters, it kind of takes away something else. Is what, like with KCP specifically, it was something that they were able to do previously, where you have a 3-and-D guy, you have a guy that can defend, you have a guy that can space. They don't have that in their arsenal anymore. And so you're going to Christian Braun, who can play defense. I don't think he's as good of a defender as KCP. And he can shoot, but he's not as good of a shooter as KCP. He drives. And so that's fine. That's a little bit of a different aspect, but he has been super valuable at times for Denver. Michael Porter's shooting less. Jamal Murray is shooting less. They're spacing less for some reason. Denver is so low in terms of the actual spacing aspect of their team that they're mostly just getting drives to the basket and mid-range jumpers. They're not really getting a whole bunch of threes in rhythm. And it's a really tough spot for them to be, because a lot of the time the shots that they take on the threes are either late shot clock threes, or it's Michael Porter grabbing a DHO and then shooting a contested jumper. He took a lot of those yesterday, trying to get himself back into rhythm. And so there's just a lot of factors that are at play here. Westbrook is good. He has continued to prove that he could be helpful for the Nuggets, but Jeff's right. Like, Denver doesn't have they don't have all of the answers anymore boiled down into a 5-man lineup. And if they didn't have it with that 5-man lineup, then Bruce Brown was a good option at that point. Now, the other factor that people aren't really discussing is that it's just 2 years ago athletically for a lot of these guys. Like, Aaron Gordon was a better athlete 2 years ago, not as burdened by the physicality of the NBA rigors of the past 2 seasons. Michael Porter, same thing. He's played so much basketball over the last couple of years. I think he's playing a little bit slower, especially of late. It's not his fault. Like, it's never anybody's fault. It's just like different aspects. Jamal Murray, same thing. Murray, I think, is playing slower than he was back in 2023. And that's Bruce Brown, also great athlete, versatile athlete off the bench. So they're always going to get compared to 2023. This is a different team, though. This is a different group. It's a different thing. Lots of folks talk about Jokic. I should also mention that Jokic was not good enough in this game. Like, that's plain stop. Like, full stop. If the Nuggets get a normal Jokic game, maybe they win this one. He got taken out of his rhythm, and he was not good down the stretch. 6 of 15 from the field. How many times has Jokic shot below 50% this year? Like, it feels very little. But he shot reasonably well on the threes overall. There were some that he kind of just jacked up out of nowhere, including a late shot clock heave, or a late game clock heave. So I'm not going to fully criticize that. But the shooting around the rim, he didn't take that many shots in the paint. I was going back and looking at the overall box score and the shot chart. He didn't go to the paint that often. He didn't grab a single offensive rebound. It looked like he did not want to deal with the physicality down there. And is that something kind of psychological, given the fact that he's battled with Towns before, given that he's played against OG Anunoby before, he's played against Josh Hart before, he knows what these guys can provide? I don't know. Or maybe it was just a choice. Maybe it was just his mind was kind of taken out of things by foul trouble. Maybe he was just so focused on shooting threes that kind of forgot that the team still needs him to take some twos and to get into the paint, to get into the post. But they didn't really post him up once. And I don't know whether that was a game plan thing, because they never really looked for it. Like, Jokic never really looked for it, let alone the rest of the Nuggets. So kind of odd. I don't think it was just about them not giving him the ball. It's a choice a lot of the time. If he wants to get into the post, if he demands the ball, the team will give him the ball. I know that a lot of people think that Jamal Murray is the worst human and just is very selfish and has all those things. He's not. Like, he did what he thought was necessary for the team yesterday to keep them in the game. But if Jokic was in the paint, he would still give Jokic the ball. He would absolutely like dump the ball down into the post and let Jokic go to work. He knows that Jokic is the best player in the world. That's not something that he forgets readily. So Denver's got to figure some stuff out. They do. I should make sure to mention that Russell Westbrook fought his butt off yesterday. 14 points, 14 rebounds, 4 assists, did have 4 turnovers. And look, there are some things that I can point out and some things that should be pointed out overall. I tend to think that rather than the Nuggets, like, for what it's worth, I don't agree with the decision to start Westbrook. I understand why. I understand what they're doing, and I understand what Michael Malone's trying to do, where you try to play those guys together as much time as you possibly can every single game. But Christian Braun has played really well, and this shouldn't be a demotion for him. I think it's ultimately going to be a demotion for him, and it's going to be tough for him to get back into that starting lineup if Denver kind of straightens out and does the normal thing. Like, they should get back on track here at some point. But I think that the Nuggets should have focused on Westbrook coming in relatively early with the second unit, and 7 minutes into the first quarter, you come back in for Murray, and Denver plays that particular rotation. And they play Jokic and Russ together to the end of the first quarter, the end of the third quarter, and then Westbrook can close in some of these quarters as well. I don't know if that's what's ultimately going to happen. I don't know what it's going to look like. Michael Malone probably doesn't fully know what it's going to look like. I think these guys are kind of doing this on the fly. I don't necessarily think that this was a premeditated thing for the Nuggets. But they know that Westbrook and Jokic have had such a great combo together. We'll see if they can recover that. They're playing Philly next. I'm curious to see how they handle it. Philly's played better basketball over the course of this last week. They're way better than they were even when they lost to the Nuggets in Denver like a week and a half ago. So curious to see how the Nuggets handle themselves. Rest of the guys off the bench that I haven't really mentioned that much. Peyton Watson, 1 of 2 from the field, 2 of 2 from the line, 1 rebound, 0 assist, 0 steals, 0 blocks, -7 in 19 minutes. Not an involved game for Peyton Watson. He didn't really make an impact. And this is some of the worries that people have heading into the playoffs. There are times where guys can float. You could say the same thing for Julian Strawther, who shot the ball, had 5 points on 6 shots, 1 of 4 from 3, 4 rebounds. Good for him getting involved on the glass. And he did have a nice block, Julian did, on OG Anunoby when he tried to post him up. Only committed 1 foul as well for that entire stretch. So I think that Julian played a little bit better than Peyton did. But if that's the case, if that's what the Nuggets are going to be dealing with, they're going to be in a pretty tough spot, I would say. Going to be interesting to see how they handle themselves. DeAndre Jordan, I thought, was good in the first half. He didn't get back in the second half because the Nuggets decided to play Jokic the entire second half since he only played 9 minutes in the first. I'm not sure if that was the right decision, by the way. If I were the Nuggets, I probably would have given Jokic a 2 to 3 minute break, but that's just not the way the rotations broke down. So, look, Denver's in an interesting place. They've lost 3 games in a row. They're trying to figure out exactly how they handle it. They're trying to figure out exactly how to handle this moment. And it's going to be fascinating to see what they do. Okay, I need to address this. Jamal Murray made me a hater says, I also noticed MPJ calling for the ball on the perimeter once. He realized he wasn't going to get it and walked into the paint. Murray settled for a step back 3 and hit it. Murray had it going in this game, and Michael Porter didn't. Michael Porter had 9 points on 3 of 8 from the field, 1 of 5 from 3. He took some ill-advised shots, and he didn't get involved in a variety of other places. He had 3 rebounds in 26 minutes, had a block, so good on him. But he was minus 10 in a game the Nuggets lost by 10. I don't think he was that good in this game. So if Murray feels like he's got it going and had played pretty well, and Porter hasn't played pretty well, then I just look, man, I think that Porter's in a pretty solid slump here. And I don't know if he knows, I don't think he knows how to get out of it that well. He's been very frustrating over the course of these past few games. And I just don't think he's getting involved in the right ways. He should be trying to get on the glass. He should be trying. And I understand that that's like when you're trying to just go into the paint, that's what you're talking about. I'm talking about on the defensive end. I'm talking about locking up on the defensive end, involving yourself there, getting out and running. The team will find you if you get out and run, if you're able to get stops and then get out and run. Jamal looks for him all the time in transition. That's what he's actively looking to do. And he does look for him most of the time throughout the process of the game. I just don't think that Porter's played well. And take that for what you will. Murray had it going, and I don't blame him for trying to put the team on his back a little bit, especially because Joker wasn't trying to get into the paint either. So do I like that Murray took 25 shots? No. But he's one of the only guys that shot above 50% on the team. So credit to him for doing it. Okay. Let's take a break. When we come back, we're going to chat about this deadline article that I just put out. We will get into all of those layers and just where I think the Nuggets are at here on Pickaxe and Roll. All right, we're back. Final segment, Pickaxe and Roll. Thank you so much for tuning into the show. Let's talk about this article that I just put out here. Denver's 1 week away. The NBA's 1 week away from the trade deadline. There's other things that have kind of popped up here, and I'm very interested to see whether the Nuggets get involved, whether they decide that they need to get involved. The premise of my article was effectively that the Nuggets don't have enough right now. I don't believe that they are good enough. And one of the biggest reason why is the defensive end. In their 19 losses, the Nuggets have allowed a 122 defensive rating. It ranks 27th in the NBA. In games when the Nuggets hold teams to under a 115 defensive rating, they have a 21-5 record. 21-5. And it seems pretty obvious. Look, I get how that sounds. Look, hey, the Nuggets, when they defend, they win. For the Nuggets specifically, it's especially obvious to me because when you're an offensive-minded team that's led by an offensive-minded player like Jokic and a supporting cast that is mostly on the offensive end with Murray and Porter, then you're very rarely going to be playing defensive games. But when the Nuggets ultimately do hold teams to a solid defensive performance, they often win. The Nuggets, and I put the stat out there, in games that Jokic has played this year, they haven't been under a 110 offensive rating. They've been under 110 just 6 total times for the entire season. Sometimes you're going to have bad offensive nights, but Denver very rarely does. And what that says to me is that if their defense is in a good place, if they can continue to find defense that if they can continue to find defensive options, then they could still win. They could still win at a very high level. But they're 2-8 now against teams that are in the top 4 of either conference. I don't think that they are rising to the level of elite teams this year. And I don't think that they have enough as currently constructed. That is open to interpretation. If you believe that the Nuggets have enough, I don't blame you. still have the same core that won them a championship 2 years ago. And they have a whole bunch of young guys. Russell Westbrook, who's playing well, and they have a variety of different options on the wings that can give them some different looks. And so if you believe that the Nuggets can win, I don't bemoan that. But I look at the rest of the rotation beyond what's currently playing, and I'm seeing they're not going to get any help. Dario Saric, Zeke Naji, Jalen Pickett, Hunter Tyson. DeAndre Jordan is a spot guy. He's a spot option. He's not going to play every night. And then you have like Vlatko Čančar and Deron Holmes. Those are the two that I was thinking. And that's it. Like, that's all the Nuggets have on their roster outside of the current guys that play. And so that just puts a whole bunch of pressure on like the starters. And now you're including Westbrook in that conversation, plus Christian Braun, Julian Strawther, Peyton Watson. Are those guys going to be ready? Last year, Peyton Watson wasn't ready. This year, he probably will be. We'll see. Julian Strawther was a rookie last year. He didn't play. Will he play this year? Jury's out. He probably has to play because the Nuggets need some spacing. But can they live with the defense? I don't know. So you look at that and you look at the way that Denver's kind of has their roster constructed. I just think that there's a ton of pressure on each of those individual pieces. Like Jokic has to play well. Murray has to play well. Porter has to play well. Gordon has to play well. All of these guys have to play up to their standard within their roles, and then Denver can win. But if there's any shakiness, if there's any doubt, if there's any possible weak link there, then Denver's they don't have the ability to compensate for that, in my opinion. So here's Denver's asset list if they decide that they want to make a trade. Let's say they don't want to trade any aspect of their roster and they just want to add to the current rotation, add to the current top 8 that they have. They have 1 first-round pick, and that first-round pick is actually, it's tough because they have so many protections on the other 3 first-round picks that they have put out there that it may not convey that 2031 first-round pick. It may not. They have first-round draft pick swaps in 2026, 2028, 2030, and 2031 if they don't decide to trade that 2031 first-round pick. They have 0 second-round picks because this offseason they gave up 6 second-round picks to do 2 different moves, to move up for Deron Holmes, who, like, it's unfortunate that he got injured, but Denver just hasn't been able to reap the benefits of adding him to their roster. And then 3 seconds to get rid of Reggie Jackson. That was bad, like, just objectively. Denver doesn't have a lot of assets because you look at that, you say, okay, so they can't do a lot of draft picks. They've got Zeke Naji's contract, which has an additional, beyond this year, 3 years, $23.1 million. That's a lot of commitment for any team that wants to try to clear their books. Most of the time when you're making a trade like this, you're not wanting to take on long-term salary. Zeke Naji has long-term salary. Dario Saric has a player option next year. So teams are not going to necessarily want to take his contract because they know that he's going to pick up that player option. Duh. Jalen Pickett and Hunter Tyson have guaranteed contracts in 2025-26 next year. And then they have team options after that. Maybe Jalen Pickett's done enough to facilitate, to have a team say, okay, we'll take a chance on him. He still makes just $1.8 million or so. So it's not like the Nuggets can really use his contract to match a whole bunch of what they're doing. They've got Vlatko Čančar's expiring contract, but he's also Nikola Jokic's friend, and what Jokic wants and what his organization wants, Jokic really gets. And then you've got an injured Deron Holmes. They're probably not trading Deron. That would be ludicrous, I think, coming off of a torn Achilles, but who knows? So that's what they've got. And if you're opposing teams, like I put this line in the article, there are 29 NBA teams that can come up with a better asset list than that. Like whether it's draft picks, whether it's players, whether it's expiring contracts, whatever. Like other teams can do way more than what the Nuggets can do. So Booth is going to be in a really tough place trying to make some of these moves. And the biggest reason why is because he turned those future first round picks and those future second round picks into Julian Strawther, Peyton Watson, Aaron Gordon prior to him. Tim Connolly did that, and DeRon Holmes. So you turn it into 3 young players. If you're unwilling to trade those young players, which sounds like they are, then it's going to be pretty difficult for Denver to make any serious move. So that's where they are. They're probably not going to make a whole bunch. They're probably not going to be able to do a whole bunch unless they decide, hey, you know what, we'll explore trading Michael Porter Jr. They obviously can't trade Murray. He's he just signed his contract extension. It's illegal to trade him. Same thing for Aaron Gordon. They're not trading Jokic. So that just kind of by process of elimination says Michael Porter is the one that you're looking to deal. And so I put out a variety of different machinations on what they could look at with Porter. I don't think that they will seriously consider anything with him. But could the Atlanta Hawks potentially decide that they want to pair him with Trae Young, given that Jalen Johnson is out for the season? Maybe that's a DeAndre Hunter plus Bogdan Bogdanovic trade for Michael Porter. Is that good enough for Denver? Is there a construction that makes sense to send him to San Antonio to be a floor spacing forward next to Victor Wembanyama? Like, what about Harrison Barnes and Trey Jones and a second round pick or something like that? Is that good enough? I don't know. Probably not. Could Porter be involved in a Cam Johnson deal where Cam Johnson goes somewhere else and then Denver sends Michael Porter to Brooklyn and gets various players and assets there? I'm not sure who that would be. Could Denver get involved in the Jimmy Butler trade if somebody wanted Porter and then get other players that they could use? I don't know. All that seems kind of unlikely to me. I don't necessarily think that those are likely ideas for Denver to happen. So the Nuggets are probably looking smaller. They're probably looking at, okay, you can add the 2031 first round pick to a deal. You could add swaps to the deal. And some of the names that I threw out there, and I talked about this with Matt on Locked On a couple nights ago, Luke Kennard, Aaron Wiggins, or Kenrich Williams from OKC if they decided to make a big move. Could you get somebody on the New Orleans Pelicans like Jose Alvarado, Javonte Green, Daniel Tice, Josh Okogie or Cody Martin on the Charlotte Hornets if you're looking for a defensive wing? Jayshawn Tate, same thing for the Houston Rockets. Maybe the Indiana Pacers decide they want to clear a little bit of salary and you can get involved with that for Aaron Nesmith or Obi Toppin or Jarris Walker or somebody like that. Chris Boucher has been mentioned. Larry Nance Jr. is always interesting. Trey Lyles, what about a Trey Lyles reunion? There's a lot of names that you can throw out there. And so it wouldn't surprise me. Jeff in the comments says Mark Stein was reporting the Hawks are looking to deal Bogdan Bogdanovic. Now, I'm not surprised by that given the way that he's played. He has not played well, and he's still an older wing who's probably not going to help on the defensive end. But could the Nuggets get involved in that? Maybe so. The DeAndre Hunter Bogdan Bogdanovic deal is something that I've been talking about since the summer. Like, that's not a reported thing, but it's something that has just made sense for a long time. I don't know. I don't know if they would be able to do that. I don't know if the Nuggets think that that's a good idea, but it could be something that they explore, given that Denver just has such limited options. So I'm curious to see where they go. I don't know what's ultimately going to happen. I do know the Nuggets have explored the idea of trading MPJ before. It's been happening for multiple months. There's stuff that I've talked about on this podcast. There's stuff that I've not talked about on this podcast. And they're trying. Like, Calvin Booth is trying. He's not just sitting on his hands doing nothing. The Nuggets are not just sitting on their hands doing nothing. I think that they know that they're not good enough. The question that Nuggets fans have to ask and have to maybe be comfortable with is if the Nuggets are still not going to be good enough after kinds of trades like these, then maybe it makes sense to wait until the summer and make your big moves then. That's a tough pill to swallow because I don't think a lot of Nuggets fans want to waste a year, but it kind of feels like the year's slipping away a little bit. I could be wrong. Like, they're still fourth in the West. Maybe they make a run. The Dallas Mavericks made a run last year after they traded for PJ Washington and Daniel Gafford. So, like, it is possible to kind of trade things and make things make sense a little bit more. Whether they're able to do it, I don't know. So we'll see. We'll see what ultimately happens. We're a week away from this trade deadline. I'm very curious to see what the Nuggets decide to do. If they do something, then you guys will be the first to know, and I'll be doing a podcast here, and we get to react, and you get to yell at me for whatever I say. And like, if I'm saying something good, if I'm saying something bad, then I guess you get to yell at me, and I get the opportunity to block you if I need to. So it'll be just fine. Tough stretch for the Nuggets, hasn't it? It's been a tough stretch. Heading into the All-Star break, it feels like they're in a really tough spot. And I'm curious to see what happens. That is going to do it for this episode of Pickaxe and Roll, brought to you by our good friends over at BetOnline. Thank you so much for tuning into the show. Thank you for listening to me stammer and do everything that I do. Appreciate all the love and support on the show, as always, when you're providing it. Really do appreciate it. We'll talk again soon. I'll talk again after probably Friday's show or Friday's game, and we will see what happens. Thank you so much, everybody. Hit that like button on the way out. We'll talk to you guys very soon.